Hello, nerds. Nerds for humanity. We have a lot to discuss with Phil. For those of you who don't know, Phil's been on the channel through the whole 2024 cycle where he and I were fiercely debating the primary, and I'm not going to say I told you so, Phil, but we were arguing about Biden's readiness to compete in the general. And then we kind of joined forces, I think, when Harris got the nomination, and then we had a fun post-election convo with some MAGA folks, and now here we are in April of 2025. It's only been a few months, but it feels like longer. First of all, how have you been, man?
I've been good overall, I think, considering the state of the world and everything. I'm in my second year of law school, so getting close to exam season, which is always a fun time of the school year. So that's been a lot of work, but it's also nice to have that kind of as a distraction for all the stuff that's going on in the world.
Oh, so did you, I'm guessing like there's conversations on campus around, the Constitution and
For sure.
co-equal branches, all that kind of the oldies, back in the old days.
Some of the actions Trump has taken also for against law firms, like one of the law firms that he tried to go after was one that employed an NYU professor. And so, I mean, just the atmosphere of, hey, maybe we can disobey courts. Hey, we can go after law firms that employ people we don't like. We can go for sanctions for lawyers who do unreasonable cases against us.
Yeah.
All that stuff just really worrisome. And then add on top of that, the freaking Eric Adams quid pro quo deal to try and get him to not be prosecuted in exchange for giving positive immigration policy for the Trump administration. As I live in New York City, so that also was just horrifying to see too. So, terrible.
MAGA makes for the strangest bedfellows. I mean, I've been on Twitter debating people over Eric Adams's, integrity, and I'm like, how am I criticizing this guy, and you guys are saying he's like a patriot and all this crap, just because your guy blessed him. Suddenly the narrative shifts 180 because they were not loving Eric Adams before.
Right. And it's really interesting, that case, because the Trump administration did something. They're going to have the charges dismissed, but with the ability, but basically without prejudice, they could bring it back later if Eric Adams did something they didn't like. And so it put the other side's lawyers in a tough position, because what do we do here? And what the end the judge ruled was, the only way to fix this is to dismiss the charges, but with prejudice, which means you can't bring it back in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very weird situation where people were actually rooting for the charges to be dismissed forever, because that was the only way that you wouldn't have this Trump holding it over his head forever, as
oh, that's so weird. Yeah,
it's the legal arguments that have to be used to defeat Trump at this point. They're making it's getting very weird, because it's so outside the norms that you have to be a little bit creative, I think, sometimes.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about reflecting on the 2024 loss. I'm in the middle of this book called Fight, which does a little bit of a behind the scenes, and haven't finished it yet, but I'm about 2/3 of the way through. It's by Jonathan Allen and Arnie Parnes. And the one thing that I still walk away with even more convinced is that a lot of the blame needs to fall on Joe Biden for deciding to run for re-election. And had we had a full primary in January of 24, we would have had a chance to nominate someone definitely younger, but also someone not connected to the Biden first term, who wouldn't have to defend the inflation and border security stuff.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing that I heard in the book, which, you know, who knows, like maybe their sources have a axe to grind, but there were arguments that Biden made it clear to Harris that there should be no daylight
I
between
heard about
them.
that. That just infuriated me to.
Yeah. I mean, I can say this as like a Monday morning quarterback. So who knows if I were in that position, but if I had just agreed to step down because I had convinced myself that that's the only way to beat Trump and that Trump is a threat to democracy, which clearly, I mean, Biden was right about that. I probably would have said to Kamala, like, I get it. I'm a big boy. You do what you got to do. We'll let the historian sort out my record, but you just win.
100%.
No?
And I think that I remember when there was on The View, the interview where she was asked, like, did you change anything? And she said, you know, nothing comes to mind. And like a few minutes later, she kind of staged herself like, actually, I'd put like more bipartisan, more Republicans in my administration. But like the instinct of no daylight. And I remember after that interview, like talking to people, I was like, I feel like she's been running a really good campaign. And I feel like if she lost, it's like not her fault. But at this point after the interview, I don't know, because that's just such an insane answer to give. Like in a time when people are so frustrated with the incumbent party. Like you don't even have to like trash Biden. You can just say like, listen, you know, I respect President Biden a lot, but my focus is going to be 100% on lowering prices and getting more housing. And I don't think Biden had to rebuild our economy after COVID, but you know what? That was his focus. My focus will be lowering prices. That's a difference between us. Like you do something like that. It's not even a huge. We have to destroy Biden's record to like. But I do think hearing about that report of him calling her and saying political debate no daylight. It frustrates me so much because you're right. It's like you step down this courageous thing to say, listen, I'm going to back off and say, you know what? I'm not the right person here to win. I'm going to do what's best for the country here. And I think you're right that later than he should have backed away probably a whole year ago. I think you're totally right about that.
Yeah.
But he did that. And I think that deserved a lot of respect. And I think a lot of people gave him that respect. But the idea that you'd call your VP and basically be like, don't criticize me. It's like, listen, do what you need to do. Go take him on, take him down. Like that's the I would have given if I were Biden. And then you add on to it, like, I remember I watched his DNC speech at the convention. I thought it was a fine speech, but the one thing about it that was like true was that it was not a lot about lifting Kamala up. It was more about his legacy.
Yes.
And that was disappointing too, because I think that there was another opportunity for him to kind of lift Kamala up and give her a bit of a boost and kind of making it a little bit more about him. And then you go back to the very start of the administration where Biden gave her the jobs that I think were the worst jobs imaginable. Like whether you want to debate whether she was actually the borders are, he kind of put some immigration on her plate. I think he did like voting rights too after the voting rights bill was like going to fail. He didn't give her a lot of opportunities to like show her strengths and really succeed. And I think that ended up biting us later on when she was the successor. And then even when there was that conversation about should Biden drop out or not at the in like June, one of the defenses they were putting up was, well, listen, if you get rid of me, it's Kamala. And look at all these bad poll numbers. It's like throughout the entire administration, there was no real effort to be like, probably Kamala is going to be our next nominee after I step down or serve 2 terms. How can we make her a powerful candidate and an effective candidate? And that was just frustrating too for the whole process, I feel like.
Yeah. It reminds me of in the private sector where you often will see execs who are a little bit threatened by people that report to them because they want the people to do well, but they also want to get their own promotion and they don't want to be outshined.
Right.
And so that's a little bit of human nature. I mean, you would have hoped for a greater profile and courage for someone like the president and someone who really prides himself on doing the right thing for the country. I mean, I think my most generous defense of him, if I had to take a position supporting Biden's actions, would be like, well, he really in his heart of hearts thought that his record was the winning record.
Yeah.
And therefore, no daylight means, Kamala, you should take full advantage of this amazing all the, the CHIPS Act and getting out of the, post-pandemic kind of recovery. And, what else did he do? I like
gun reform laws,
some of those things.
Yeah.
So I think maybe he was like, oh well, this is a pair of aces. Like, why wouldn't you go full on with this? Which then says like, okay, self-awareness issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Probably that I think Biden, probably to this day, thinks that he could have beaten Trump. I think there was some interview where he was like, and I think that he's really proud of his record, and I think part of it is he doesn't want his legacy in history books to be kind of tarred by his VP. Mm-hmm. So that's like part of like an ego level on one level. And the other level is like, I think he probably thought it's a bad strategy to go and attack me. And I think sometimes everyone does this where they're like, well, the best strategy is actually what exactly aligns with my interests and my political like you'll have people like on the left or the center be like, the exact right strategy is to do exactly what I believe is the correct policy too. It's like, that isn't always the case, but people like to think that to themselves, I think, a lot. So I'm sure he probably thought Kamala's best strategy is to run on our great record. And in the end, that'll come through for her and it'll make her look weak or something to like attack her own president. I don't know. Yeah.
And I also need, in fairness to him, I forgot, he did do the Inflation Reduction Act, which was kind of a big deal for a lot of renewables and infrastructure. Yeah, he actually had a decent record. I think if I were, in hindsight, if I were advising him, I would have said, look, you do have a lot of big accomplishments and she should play those up. She will need to get separation from you on border and inflation. Mm-hmm. And maybe even she might need to do a sister soldier moment on DEI. Mm-hmm. And that could be interpreted as criticizing you. But like, Joe, like this is a full contact sport. We got to win this thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm actually super excited about 2028.
Yeah.
I just watched a 3-hour Pete Buttigieg interview and I'm listening to it. I'm like, dude, this guy's super smart. And just you talk about taking cognitive tests. Like, I think he probably do pretty well. And,
I think so too,
yeah. And he served in Afghanistan. He understands business. He did a little bit of management consulting. He's been a Secretary of Treasury, so he's run a big budget. It's not like, oh, we're going to find, a Fox News personality and put him in charge of the Department of Defense. This, Pete's been around. He's owned a P&L. Like, he's owned a budget, let's say.
Isn't he a little old though? I don't know.
Yeah. He's getting on in years.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, everybody I talk to is like, yeah, but America's not ready for a gay president. I don't know. I remember when I caucused for Barack Obama in 2008 versus Hillary. A lot of people said, oh, America's not ready for a black president. And we were, for the right black president. Right. Like, you can't just pick anybody. But I think Pete's pretty capable, and he's willing to go on kind of Fox News and kind of duke it out. And I like the guy. What's your read? I know a lot of people are excited about AOC as well, and there's Wes Moore is pretty good too.
Yeah, and I think I also like hate the like, oh, this guy's gay or she's a woman. That means that this group is not going to like her, and that means that like, and that like, I think that's such a bad way to think about it, because I feel like, for one thing, like to your point, right? No one would have thought like the guy to flip Indiana on the presidential level, that's Barack Obama. It's like, no one would have thought like, oh, it's going to be like this, like someone who's like super like exactly the same as like every single previous president who's ever like been. The truth is, like, people are ready for new things when they're ready for new things, and we don't know that. There's no really way to know that for sure until it happens. And so I think that like one thing that I think does happen, and it happens, I think, in both in positive and negative directions, people just assume that like, because of your identity, you'll have certain groups either locked up or like no chance, right? And I feel like I remember when Tim Walz was being talked about for VP, I think a lot of people were talking about how like, oh, he's gonna like crush it with rural areas, like he's like has this farmer with a gun vibe to him, Of course, like, conservative Republicans on farms would like be like, I'm gonna vote for this guy.
Yeah.
I remember saying at the time, like, I looked at his past elections, like in Minnesota when he was running for governor. He was doing just as well as Joe Biden. Like, there was no real difference. And I think that's like a good place to like always like start the analysis is like, okay, when you actually ran and people actually had to vote for you or not, were you able to bring in these groups or not? And it isn't always what you'd expect. Like Kamala Harris, to her credit, I think she actually held the line on white voters. You improved a little bit from Joe Biden, I believe.
Maybe.
And it's not what you'd necessarily expect, like just from like identity basis, right? And then you have candidates like Josh Shapiro or Ruben Gallego who like way overperform John Ossoff, right? And that's always a good place to start. Of like, when you actually run, can you get people, like a broad swath of people, to really be like, yes, I'm in? Because that's not like because you can't really dismiss that as like, oh, well, it's my vibe that like this person would not appeal to this group. It's hard evidence, you know? And like Pete Buttigieg, to his credit, I think did a really good job in Iowa and New Hampshire. And I think that's really positive. The idea that like this is someone who can like go into these kind of small states, do that, like kind of those small town halls, and be really well liked. And then the one question is, can he kind of build that coalition beyond those states? And I don't think that he can't, but I think it's just something that remains to be seen.
Yeah, the other thing is, so I think Harris and Biden both, at least according to Gemini, about 4 in 10 white voters supported Harris, and the same level for Biden.
Right.
Yeah, so you would, if it were purely identity based, like she should not have done as well with white voters as Joe Biden did.
Right.
Yeah, and it's same thing like in terms of identity. If you told me that a kind of reality TV star would become president, I would have been like, really? That's kind of crazy. We're not going to go from Obama to Trump. Like, that's nuts. That's nuts. And then if you would have said, oh, what about a 78-year-old convicted felon who tried to overturn the previous election, I would be like, oh my God, that's laughable. So I'm never gonna count out the American voting population to do things that surprise us, So
totally.
like, just because Pete Buttigieg is gay, like it's. I think a lot of people, and not just coastal people, I think a lot of people are like, look, I care about the economy.
Yeah.
I care about a government that is running efficiently, and I care about our place in the world, and I care about people that I feel like have high integrity.
Totally.
And who they marry, like, who cares? Like, if you're all big on marriage, like, why would you vote for the guy that has had 3 marriages, and many affairs? Like,
that's Donald Trump's real sanctity of marriage candidate for sure.
Yeah, like, he's like, oh, it's Easter, I'm the president of Christianity. It's like, I don't know if you've read the Bible. Like, it doesn't really go for a lot of things he's doing. Anyway, what about, so if you had to stack rank who maybe we'll ask 2 questions. Who do you like the most personally? And then who do you predict will get the nomination in 28?
I really like Pete Buttigieg too. I actually watched that same 3-hour thing. Maybe had the best use of time, but it was great. and I think one thing he does really effectively is that he can kind of like hear someone say something that maybe is not factually correct, becomes kind of an emotional level. And you can kind of hear them on the emotional level and then kind of give the information without kind of talking down to people.
Yeah.
And that's a really important, in an era of so much misinformation, like how you respond to people who like have beliefs that are not really based in fact is really important. And then I also think I think he's just a generally good guy. I think he like is in it for the right reasons. And I think he's also focused on government reform, which I think is really important. I think whoever the next president is, I think they have to have like a real clear idea of like how to make the government effective and efficient. Because I suspect there'll be a lot of rebuilding that has to happen. And that's going to be really awful, because I think it will show the federal government is kind of a little bit in ruins after Trump's administration. But it's also an opportunity to try and build it back in a way that is more effective and than it was before. And I think you need people who kind of are smart, clear about a job that has to be done, and have some experience in that. And so, like you mentioned, I think Pete Buttigieg does have experience being cabinet secretary. But then I think also one person I think who also be very effective in that role is Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I was kind of looking at his website and kind of he has a whole government efficiency section of his website. But it's actually like, unlike Doge, actually effective. And so he's done things like, because part of efficiency is sometimes hiring people to fill jobs so you can move things faster. And so he cut down the time for like different small business licenses to get like enormously. And then he built back a huge bridge built to take like years. He did it in like 12 days. So I feel like his whole motto is like get stuff done. And I think he's done an effective job there. And so I like that. And so on like a personal level, I think Pete Buttigieg is one of my favorites on a kind of who I think would be most effective in the job itself. I think Pete would be great. I think Shapiro would be great. I think Wes Moore has done a pretty good job in Maryland too. And so I feel like on who is like the electoral juggernaut, I think that's a really hard question in part because I feel like Americans always want kind of the opposite of what they've just had. And it's hard to know kind of what will be the thing that people want the opposite of in 2028. Like we had, Bill Clinton and like kind of all these scandals. He's a great talker, but he had all these scandals. He wasn't super honest. So we go to like George Bush, this honest guy. I want to have a beer with him. Is he the best with words? Probably not. But like, you know what? He's a good guy. And then we go to like, oh wow, this whole economy collapsed. Can we trust government? Let's go with this hope and this beautiful speaker who can like resonate with all of us and give us hope for the new government. And then we get like, well, let's have the opposite of that. Someone who just says exactly what's on his mind. Doesn't give a care about political correctness, doesn't care about all that stuff. He's going to break the government because we tried reforming it. Now we're going to break the government. And then you get, well, that kind of was bad. Let's go for an institutionalist who like cares about the institution so much and is old. He's thinks he's going to say so much that sometimes doesn't even say anything. Like that's how institutionalized he is. And then, well, we didn't like that. Let's go back to the Trump thing that we just voted against. And so I think one of the questions I'm thinking about is, what is the thing about Trump people will be like, I want the opposite of that. And I think a big thing will be, as always has been, we want the opposite of all this chaos and all this like kind of cruelty and all this kind of just corruption. And I think that lends itself to someone like Pete Buttigieg or like Josh Shapiro, who's like competent, effective, and isn't afraid to be like, yeah, I get in the weeds of policy. And that's okay. Cause like, I know what I'm doing. So that's what I've been thinking about.
If you take the framework of people vote for the opposite of the last guy, I would argue Pete is more of an opposite of Trump than Shapiro is.
Yeah, in some ways. But I think the one thing is that I think Shapiro has a little more experience and kind of in like state government. He's a governor. I think that gives him a certain amount of credibility too. But you're right. I think Pete, when someone said this point, I thought it was a really good one, that part of why Pete's effective is that he's not trying to pretend to be someone he's not when he's talking. Yeah. Like I think there's sometimes people who are like, I'm trying to be like a bro. I'm one of the bros, right. Or like, and it's like, it doesn't come off as like organic and real. And he's like, listen, I'm a policy wonk. Like I'm like someone who like gets in the details and I love that. And I love kind of being a bit of a nerd about that. And it comes across really authentic, which I think is really great about Pete. And I think people should try and be themselves more in politics.
Two criticisms of Shapiro. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I like him too. One is that his oratory style is really good. It's so close to Obama's.
Yeah.
But some people say like, it seems like he's like going into Obama mode, like cosplaying Obama. Now, it may be one of those things where it's like, no, that's how he's always been talking. It just happens to be similar.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it is like really similar. And I think it's interesting too, because if you watch DeSantis after Trump won, he kind of changed a little bit how he talks too. He was kind of like a lot of the hands. It's a lot of like, and people often, I think, somewhat mold their like political speaking style to like the most popular figure in their party. I think even Pete had a certain element of, not to the Shapiro level, but like when I first heard Pete, it felt somewhat Obama-y to me. So I think that it seems natural that, like, if you're growing up and like this is like the pinnacle of like political like speakers, right? You'd be like, oh, I'm gonna like model after them and talk kind of like them because that's like what everyone seems to like, and like I think I like it too. But I totally agree that like there's some. It does seem like, man, if I close my eyes, is this Obama?
Like the cadence? Yeah. Okay, so then the other thing, which is more serious, is I think a lot of Democrats, myself included, and I don't even know what party I'll be supporting. I'm still waiting for like a credible third party, but let's just say likely I'll have to participate in the Democratic primary. I very much disagree with the Israeli policy on Gaza. Like, and now with the latest food blockade, it's just like, come on, man, it's been, it's been a while since October 7th. And honest people will disagree on that. I think Shapiro, if I were his advisor, I would say, whether it's true or not, there's a perception that you're really, really close to the Israeli position. And by the way, for everybody out there, like, not all Israelis agree with Netanyahu. Like, if you look at polling, it's not a monolithic, like, oh, if you're against Netanyahu, it's like anti-Semitic or whatever. But I would say to Shapiro, you might need a Sister Soldier moment. You may need to take a harder line. Like, you don't have to go all the way, but you need to start saying, like, look, Netanyahu should not go this far. Like, maybe the settlements or something. Like, push back on something. Do you think there's a way for him to? Has he done that? Or
I thought he had criticized Netanyahu. I think he's called him one of the worst leaders of all time, is what he called Netanyahu. So, but I think that as a Jew who also hates Netanyahu, I think he's a terrible leader and awful. I think that there is a perception that he's like so much more pro-Israel than like other people. And I feel like one reason why I thought that maybe there was an opportunity for Kamala to choose him is that I thought that he would be able to kind of credibly talk about how to effectively move us towards two-state solution, how to kind of end this war, but not be kind of tarred with anti-Semite, right? Which is something that I think does happen to people who have just genuine, real criticisms of Israel and how it's doing, how the Israeli government and how it's, doing this war, which I think are very legitimate. And I think that he would have had a lot of credibility to do that. And so I think in some ways it was kind of a missed opportunity in that way. I think if she had been elected and he had been the VP, I think there could have been an opportunity to push more for a kind of move us towards like a long-term peace, because he could have been able to do that credibly. I think that in 4 years, I don't know what the foreign policy landscape will be, but I suspect that Israel will not be one of the top issues in that campaign, just because I think that, who knows, like, we might be like at war with China. Who knows, right? And so I wonder how much that is like something that he needs to address. I think that you're right, there is that perception, but I also think that how much of that is like actually like beyond like a subsect on Twitter, like how much is that really, how many people actually know, one, who Josh Shapiro is, and then the people who do, how many people actually feel like they have that perception? And I think that there is something to be said for that, like, because he is Jewish, people assume that he is more pro-Israel than the rest of the people there, right? And so it's just every candidate has to deal with kind of what assumptions people make kind of about their identity and how they kind of navigate that. But I don't feel like it's like a huge issue, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I think the reality is it may not be fair that people are assuming, well, maybe he's more pro-Israel because of his religion or his, kind of ethnic background. But I kind of feel like that's why he has to be clearer about his position. Now, maybe you could say, like, well, that's not fair. He other candidates don't have to be as clear.
But politics isn't fair, yeah.
It's just kind of this is the business.
I mean, Kamala Harris had to like make it so clear that she was not going to like, she was a president she wasn't just going to help Black people. Like, everyone has to kind of do this thing of like making sure that being clear to people that like my identity is not, something that you need to worry about. So everyone does this in different ways, I think. So it's not like, so I think it's fair to acknowledge like that may be something that he has to talk about more openly about like how, but I also think that I'm skeptical that this will be a huge issue in 2028, just because I think that the way foreign policy is going right now, I think we'll have
bigger issues. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Hopefully also by then, like, I mean, God willing, that this awful war is going to be over by then too. I mean, if this is going on in 2028, I mean, that would be insane.
Yeah.
And so what Israel-Palestine looks like in 2028 also, I hope, is like a very different place than today, because today is just awful.
Yeah, it's a tragedy on all sides right now. Okay, so let me share for the folks out there. I have like a 1 or 2 minute clip from that interview that you and I both saw, and I think people may want to check it out. But let me share it for us right now. Hold on, I'm gonna open up another tab. Okay. Let me go to share, present. Okay.
I want everyday life to be better.
That's what they want too.
You get up in the morning. Yeah, but importantly, like all the controversies are over what that's like. Like I want you to be able to get up in the morning, and the first thing you do is you commute to work, and by the way, if you're on EV, I want that to be affordable for you, or if you're on public transit, not to get back into the subway situation, but I want you to have good public transit to get to where you're going. And then when you get to that job, I want you to be paid well. And if you're about to have a kid, I want you to know that you're going to have parental leave when you have that kid. And if you don't want to have a kid, I want you to have the right to choose whether to have a kid, which means access to birth control and abortion and those things that give you the freedom to decide on that. And if you already have a kid, when you pick them up at school, I want that school to be good, not having its funding slashed while they set fire to the Department of Education. And then when you get home, I want you to be in a neighborhood that is safe and where you can breathe the air, because we didn't let them get rid of the Clean Air Act. And you don't have to think for one moment about whether the air you breathe or the water you drink is clean and clear, which actually takes a lot, because it means the government has to constrain those actors that would make you unfree by polluting the air and polluting the water. And then when you go to bed, I want you to know that your family's going to be fine, even if it's family like mine, despite there being some Supreme Court justice who wants to obliterate your family because it doesn't match his interpretation of his religion. Like, that's the life I want everybody to be able to live.
Yeah, I think
we can deliver that.
Wow.
Let's go.
That was pretty good.
Yeah,
that was pretty good. Like, hey, he has a few years to kind of tune it, but what I got from that is, number one, it was a generally like, here's where we should go kind of positioning versus, oh, this guy is a threat to democracy, that kind of thing. So it was forward looking.
Yeah.
And I thought it felt authentic, and also like where he was like, had some fire and passion about it, but he wasn't like screaming and like hysterical, oh, he is TDS or whatever. So I bet if anyone asked him follow-up questions like, well, what specific things would you do about Department of Education, I think he would be able to answer those questions.
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's totally true. I think that the idea that I think maybe remembering this wrong, but I think in 2020 he had the similar idea of like focusing on like freedom and like trying to reclaim that for the Democratic Party, and kind of making kind of like, we're the party of freedom, party of patriotism. Like, we don't need to kind of like cede those to the right. And I think that's a really correct analysis. Like, that I think that, there's so much like freedom, like from, but not like freedom for. And like, I think that's like a really bad thing, that our analysis often is just about, well, this is what we don't want the government to do to you, but like, what does the government owe you also to do for you? And that's part of freedom too. And I think he was extremely effective in that clip. And that's the reason it went viral. And so I think that I like the idea that he puts out that isn't kind of like, it kind of hits on an emotional level, which I think is also important for Dems to recognize, that like, it's not just about like, well, here's I saw this insane graphic that like the Democrat like Twitter account put out. It was like, here's all things we did, and it's like in this like little small little type, and it's like 400 things. And it's like, who's gonna read that, you know? And so I think that does hit in like a really emotional and effective way. But also, I think you're totally right. He has, I'm sure, all the policies to back that up if you asked him, because he's a smart guy who like does his homework, which is great.
Yeah, I would love to see a Buttigieg Vance debate, because Vance is no dummy as well.
Yeah.
And they're both, have kids. Like they're a different generation than Trump and Biden. Let's shift gears a little bit, and just from obviously, I don't think either of us are Republican kind of boosters, but just from a clinical point of view, what do we think are the best prospects for the Republican Party in 2028? Do you think like it's a Vance show, or do you think there's Marco or what or others?
We're assuming a Trump third term, right? So that's the assumption.
I mean, come on, like
no, I don't believe
you can never rule anything out, but
yeah, but I think it's weird that he's like putting that out there, but I don't think he's gonna go for a third term. But I think that Vance is like the clear favorite. I think vice presidents typically have a pretty good track record of getting the nominations. I mean, Biden obviously did it, but one thing that I think will be for every candidate, I'm sure they'll have this, where at the debate stage, you're going to have like a question like, for all the candidates, like, will you pardon Trump for all the crimes to make sure the Democrats will never come back? And they're all going to raise their hand, and they're all going to have to raise their hand, because that'll be how they get Trump support. I think Trump will hold off endorsing for a bit to make sure he gets that from every candidate. But I think it's hard to see Vance losing, only because he's going to go in with kind of a lot of the connections that you get from being like in the White House, donor connections, gets a chance to prove himself to the MAGA base, which I think does like him at this point a lot. And then the only thing left that could really shake that is if Trump endorsed someone else. But I kind of feel like Vance knows his job at this point is just to 100% back Trump up on every single thing you could imagine. And to do that so you can get his endorsement in 2028, because that's the whole ball game. So if you imagine like Vance runs and then Trump endorses him, it's really hard for me to imagine anyone beating him at that point, right? The one way that doesn't happen, though, is if they've messed up the economy, they've messed up maybe even immigration as well, they've messed up all this stuff to such a high degree, even Republicans are like, actually, I think Trump was a mistake. And that's really hard to imagine, because we've been through so much with Trump. The idea of like, but just if you imagine like we somehow got into a Great Depression, right? I think maybe at that point, someone else like maybe Nikki Haley would be able to win in that kind of scenario, who's like not as associated with the administration. But I think beyond that, I have a tough time of seeing anyone but JD Vance winning. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are a few scenarios, like if Trump actually pulls off even half of what he's promised, and he finds a way to like enforce immigration law without going overboard, which I think he has gone overboard, but let's just say he moderates that a little bit. And let's say everybody's 401ks and retirement and the stock market is booming as he promises it will soon. And he's able to kind of reduce the size of the deficit. Then I think Vance is for sure just going to be like, I was with this guy, I'm part of the team. Yeah. Great. Now, in a scenario where Trump's outcomes are more like 2016, where people are like, I don't know if this guy's the right guy to lead us in a crisis or whatever, or the markets continue to suffer and we're in a deep recession, then I think Vance becomes the Kamala Harris of the Republican Party, where he can't criticize Trump during the primary if he wants to get the nomination. So then it would open the door for someone less kind of tainted. Maybe you get a DeSantis. I don't know if the party's right for Haley. Like, I used to be a Republican in the 80s. Like, that would have been great for me. But, like, I don't think that the Romney, Reagan, McCain Republican wing is gone. So I think a DeSantis might have another shot being like, well, I'm kind of MAGA-ish,
Right.
but I'm not crazy. And, of course, hopefully, like, Florida would be doing well or something.
Right. I think you're right about kind of DeSantis has always kind of had his like foot in both camps.
Yeah.
In the way that he
like dual citizenship.
Right. And so it's like, okay, like maybe that's what you need, like a little bit of distance, but not too much to be able to like kind of pull in all the groups and be acceptable to everyone. So I think you're right that like maybe DeSantis is actually a better kind of if Trump is unpopular with the Republicans, like DeSantis is a better kind of off ramp for people than Nikki Haley. I think that's probably a good point. I agree with that.
And then in the general, if you had a DeSantis, frankly, or Vance versus Pete thing, they're going to be like, oh, Pete's a radical leftist. He's going to, they're going to just make this a connection like, oh, he's going to want to change the sexuality of your sons and all this shit.
Right.
But I don't know if the voters will buy it. I mean, the hardcore MAGA probably will vote for whoever gets nominated, but the independents, if they're not happy with the Trump outcomes, like maybe it really just comes down to like, is the market better than it was when he got there? Are prices lower? Is the world a safer place? And if the answer is yes, then like Vance probably has a clear path.
Yeah.
If not, and DeSantis tries to be like the third way, that'd be an interesting race to watch for sure.
And I think it's one thing that's always like tough is like you usually can't win the next election by kind of rerunning the one before.
Yeah.
And like so the idea of like trying to run on like DEI or all this stuff or like I just don't think it'll be as effective because I think people will kind of be a little bit like polarized against that kind of campaign after like 4 years of Trump. And my favorite number to see this is always if you look at immigration polling. And so for you, Tom, what do you think was the first year ever where people wanted immigration increased more than they wanted it decreased in like the polling of Gallup? What do you think that year was?
The first year that people wanted more immigration?
Yeah. It was like plurality more than less immigration.
I don't know, maybe in the 80s?
2020. And so that was right after 4 years of Trump. And people were like, okay, we want more immigration. And then they voted for Biden. And then in 2024, people who wanted immigration decreased 55%. Just shot up. They were negatively polarized against Biden, felt like he was too lax on the border.
Yeah.
But now, I think there was a recent poll that came out from YouGov that said like, I think at least a plurality, maybe a majority now wants think immigration makes us better off now. And it's like flipped again. So that's all to say that like these issues keep crisscrossing because whoever gets in, people feel like they go too far and then people kind of go the other direction. And so I think that's always something to recognize with like all these issues is that some of them are more stable, but some of them really, we feel like we're ascendant. This is the anti-DEI like crusade. And then suddenly, oh wait, actually people kind of like DEI because they feel like you went too far on this. Like always something to recognize about kind of people, the public seems they should go back and forth a lot.
Yeah. And I don't know why this keeps coming up for me this morning, but I will say that I think Pete has a sister soldier opportunity where people will assume he's hardcore on DEI and trans stuff. So if he does like a Newsom and he's like, look, there are some things where I'm not comfortable with, let's say biologically born men playing in women's sports or whatever, regardless of how they identify or whatever. Like that would be kind of like Shapiro being like, no more fucking settlements, it would help. Right. It would help Pete. Yeah.
And I think one thing I felt like was that bothered me about Newsom's was it felt like it was a very like kind of doing this out of like weakness or political expediency as opposed to like what he actually like thought this is actually the right balance. I think in like if you said like, I think like in general, like there are probably some sports where it's okay, but overall we should leave it up to these like the sports leagues to figure out. And I think but like there's ways to like talk about this issue where you're not doesn't feel very like, well, I'm kind of making the calculation to triangulate around Trump and I think that is something that I think I think you're right about like the idea that I think candidates, the Democratic Party, need to find ways to show they're independently thinking through things, have real principles, and are willing to stand up to the left, like where they think that they're wrong. And I think that, but I think what I think is not a smart strategy is trying to kind of triangulate around, like in this way of like, I think Whitmer did this thing where she's like, yeah, Trump's tariffs are bad, but some tariffs are good, and kind of this like, and I think I wish there was more of kind of like, I have to be like, Trump's wrong on this, and like give a clear vision. I think with the kind of whole kind of trans LGBTQ stuff, I think Pete does have an opportunity, I think, to give a really kind of unifying and compelling message of like, listen, you know, people are talking about all this like trans sports stuff, like let sports leagues figure that out. We don't need to like have like governments like tamp down everything and be like, every sport from dart throwing to like wrestling needs to have the exact same system if you're in elementary school, if you're in college. And then at the same time, let's like acknowledge that like, you know, some sports there will be a big advantage. And then overall, let's just focus on making sure no one gets discriminated against, no one gets thrown out of their house, their job, their identity, and kind of just treat everyone with respect. And I think you can do something like that is broadly unifying, instead of like this idea of like, well, you know, we have to be like on like, you know, all trans people are bad, or like, and like they shouldn't have any rights, or like this kind of idea of like, well, you know, every sport, every wrestling thing, everything has to be like the most maximal on everything, and we can't kind of think things through and kind of figure them out. I just think it's like, I just think it's always with everything. I think people have a tendency to like really be nervous about kind of, I think especially with things like trans rights and things like that, I think people are very nervous about any kind of backtracking, because it feels like on like a civil rights issue, like we should always be moving like forward, right? But I think sometimes you have to recognize that like the country isn't where you'd like it to be, or there's maybe the idea that like every sport, we should then have some policy for some sports that just doesn't make sense. I think we can think things through in a more thoughtful way and kind of follow the science on that, than being like, well, we have to take these like huge maximalist stance on everything on the most extreme parts. And I think Pete could do that in an effective way. I agree. It doesn't like sacrifice people's rights.
And I think he could do a better job on that than Newsom.
I agree, because it felt very politically calculation as opposed to like actually him having like a thoughtful position on it, to me at least.
Newsom, I mean, I'm in California. I think he's doing a great job overall. It's the fourth largest economy in the world. Like, he's doing something right, but he's so smooth. I don't know. I think we got a little authenticity thing, perception at a minimum with him. And, you know, also, I don't know if the country's ready for a California president.
Maybe not. I found that out in 2024, right? And he had this one line where he said, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia stuff was like a distraction. And I just think like we shouldn't be focused on the immigration stuff.
I see. Yeah.
And I think that's, again, this idea of like, we need to triangulate around Trump, and like, it's like, he's doing a lot of crazy stuff. Let's talk about the crazy stuff he's doing. Let's not be afraid to talk about why he's bad on immigration. Let's not be afraid to talk about why he's bad on tariffs. Let's take him on. And I think Pete Buttigieg does that really well. And he's not like afraid of being like, well, if I talk about this issue where he's wrong, people might not agree with me totally. So I think Newsom isn't quite the fighter we need. I think Pete is a much better example, kind of taking Trump on.
Well, Phil, it's always a pleasure having you on the Nerd Show. We got one chat question that we want to get at before we wrap up with you. Jeremy, who is a channel member, thanks for your support, Jeremy. It wants to hear your thoughts or our thoughts on Stephen A. Smith. Are you familiar with Stephen A. Smith?
Yeah, I think I've seen some clips, and I've seen like there's a Twitter account for like him for 2028, right?
Yeah. So like he's more known for his sports analysis, but he's a very effective communicator, and he also might be able to talk about certain issues as a Black man that in a way that Pete or JD can't. And I also think he could push back on some of the more extreme stuff, activist stuff in the Democratic Party. And he's different. He's not a politician. So, Jeremy, my view is that I wouldn't rule anybody out who's a great communicator. But I think I mean, it would have to be like another Trump phenomenon where you'd elect this person who's never worked in government or run a large organization. And so like, I think some people will be like, well, is this like another Hegseth kind of thing? Because Hegseth is a great communicator. Like he could talk about the warrior ethos and the radical left and all that stuff really well in a 30-second soundbite, but running a complex organization in a constitutional way is hard. Any thoughts, Phil, on your part about these kind of non-traditional candidates?
I think on one level, I think like do I think he'd be a good president? I think probably not, to the point you raised of like, I think it's really important that people have experience going into government. They've done something, even if it's just on a local level, just the experience of actually representing people in the past, having to get stuff done through a government process, and having to like abide by, as you said, the Constitution, these rules, these ethical rules, I think is really important. And I think we're seeing with Trump's term how just people will come in, have this idea of, and Elon Musk too in this way.
Yeah.
Like, here's how I think from the outside government works. So I'm gonna do all this crazy stuff, and it like blows up in their face. And like, oh shoot, I guess government's more complicated than I thought it was. But you'd know that if you'd ever like done government in any kind of substantial way. So I think it is really important that like we elect people who are competent and effective, but have done this kind of stuff at least on some level before. And to my point, that's why also I think he won't do very well, I think, in any kind of primary if he runs, because I think people want the opposite usually of what just happened. And I think the idea that this idea of like we need to find our own Trump, right? That's trying to win 2024, not 2028. And I think that like people will want, after a guy like says a bunch of crazy stuff, doesn't really like kind of modulate himself at all, doesn't really kind of has no experience with the government. I think the idea that they'll be like, well, let's just find like a kind of someone. I think Stephen A. Smith is not Donald Trump, but someone who kind of doesn't have experience with the government, kind of is very authentic and like kind of says what he wants. Let's have that just for a Democrat. I assume that's going to happen. Like, I think he seems like a perfectly nice guy. I don't think he's a bad guy at all, but I just expect us, Democratic Party, to be like, we want someone competent with experience who's effective. And that's, I think, not going to be Stephen A. Smith, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I also think for Stephen, like he has a really sweetheart contract right now. He's making tons of money. And if I were his friend, I would be like, the chances of you getting all the way to the Super Bowl for politics are low.
That's true.
And you could jeopardize your audience, half of your audience, for your sports stuff.
But Trump showed us, I mean, you get to the presidency, you start like a meme coin, you can make a lot of money. I mean, the corruption rules don't seem to be very strong at this point. So maybe he becomes a billionaire if he becomes president. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on. I mean, I think he could be a bit of a kingmaker, though, like who he chooses to say, like, oh, actually we should look at Mayor P, here's why I like him, blah, blah, blah. That would be kind of a great endorsement to get.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's definitely like when you're someone who has the vibe of it being very authentic and you have a good following, I think you always have the ability to influence people and kind of help lift up other people for sure. So I think you could definitely do that.
Anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up, Phil?
Just that it's great to be back, and it's great to see you again, Tom. And I think it's been a crazy 100-some days. I think that it's really important that all kind of candidates keep making clear what Trump's doing isn't okay, and don't let it kind of be normalized, and focus on like the real effects that it's happening to people. And I think it's great that you're covering all this stuff all the time. And so great to be here. And we'll see what happens in 2028 and 2026, which is also
there's always
that's also important too. So make sure to vote there too, guys.
Yeah, 100%. And quick prediction: will the House or Senate flip in 26, or what do you think?
I think the House flips. I think by a pretty, solid margin, and then I think that we're going to win Senate seats in Georgia, in Michigan, kind of all the swing seat, and I think North Carolina too. I think Roy Cooper is probably going to run it, is my suspicion. And then we're going to probably come up a little bit short though in the Senate, because it's just such a tough map. And maybe we get one kind of crazy outside win, maybe like Ohio if Sherrod Brown runs for Senate, but I suspect it'll probably end up with maybe a small Senate majority, maybe like 51 seats for Republicans, maybe even 50-50 if we're really lucky. But yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Where do you think?
Yeah, I think we'll take the House, and the margin of Republican control in the Senate will shrink. So I think I agree with your prediction. The thing I don't know is like, will the House be able to bring some more counterbalance to what the Trump administration does, or will they just continue to? I mean, the fact that they defy the Supreme Court, to me, feels like, well, they just don't care. Like, they're just gonna do whatever the hell they want.
The one thing is that the thing you can stop with the House is at least like the cuts to Medicaid, the corporate tax cuts, like that kind of stuff. At least you can put a stop on that kind of stuff. But you're right. Like, at the end of the day, our system kind of relies on Congress as a unit being able to check the president, and the courts as a unit being able to check the president. And if you have a situation where the president says, well, I don't really care what the court says, and Congress is divided in a way that isn't going to actually stand up to Trump either, you get into a really bad constitutional crisis. And so hopefully we don't get there, or at least don't get even further down that road, because I think we're already at some level in some bad shape there. But I think that's why it's important to, elect people who are willing to stand up for the Constitution, and even if their own party. So we'll see how that all goes.
Exciting times, Phil. We'll for sure have to have you back, and I'm sure
sounds great, man.
There'll be plenty to discuss next time.
Always is. Take care, buddy.
All right. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.
All right. It's always fun having Phil on the show. I feel like he's a very thoughtful person, so appreciate him coming on. Let me give you guys some going away music. I'm going to give you some closing thoughts, and I'm going to actually introduce a wild card candidate that we haven't discussed for the Democrats, and it's not Mayor Pete and it's not Shapiro. If you're in the live chat, let me know in the live chat who you think I'm going to talk about as a prospective Democratic primary spoiler. But before I do that, let me give a shout out to the people who make this channel possible. Like, I don't think I'd still be making these videos if it weren't for knowing that there are these channel members who value this content. So really appreciate it. And let's start with our highest level, which is the Nerd Cabinet. And let me share my screen. Jeremy, it's not Andrew MF Yang. Although you guys know I'm a big Yang fan. I think Andrew needs to win something first. And he's busy with other stuff that he's got going on. But I would love to see Andrew as a amazing congressman. I think he could really be a strong player there, but it would require him to be willing to spend multiple terms in Congress, and I know that would be frustrating for anybody who likes to get things done, but I think it would put him in a much better position, and it would put him in a position similar to the person that I'm going to call out in a second. But let me first shout out our channel members. And if you like this content and you've been watching me for a while and you want to keep this channel going, click on the join link on YouTube, and it helps me cover the cost for like the streaming software, like the streaming service I use. StreamYard is getting pretty expensive. It's like, I want to say it's almost $100 a month now, which is not cheap. Anyway, Soldier One, he's been supporting this channel forever. By the way, reminds me, the Nerds for Democracy board game is now in a new round of play testing. So we made a ton of improvements. So reach out to me, Tom at nerdsforhumanity.com, if you want to be a play tester. But only reach out to me if you really will play the game and take the time to give me and the design team feedback. But it's a really fun board game where you get to run for president. All right, so thank you, Soldier One, and I mentioned him because he was a playtester as well. All right, the congressional delegation, Kristen Slevin, Bike, and Zig PC. Thank you so much. Kristen's been supporting the channel for over 5 years. The city council members, we have Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Dean Galessa, Jay Perrin, Brittany, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Jeremy, who's in the live chat, Mickey, Jackson, and Unkiyu. And then I will show the registered nerds in order of length of membership. And that's only like $1.99 a month. So not a big ask. And you can see their names here. I will scroll through them. So thank you. And it looks like Joseph's our youngest. Oh, who's the youngest nerd? Let's look at them all. We don't have a nerd Supreme Court judge yet. At some point we will. I don't know how much support that is, but it's like a decent amount. Total time as a member. The youngest is Joe Tramontano, Sue Keisler, Earl Kale, Tim J, and Sue Bowman. Oh my God, nerds. We have had a new member join our group for 9 months. Come on now. All right. So let me give you guys some closing thoughts. I think the candidate to keep an eye on probably for VP stakes versus nominee is Ro Khanna. So if you haven't heard of Ro Khanna, he's a congressman from California, pretty reasonable, is able to kind of speak about issues dispassionately, doesn't kind of evoke this kind of far left over aggressive kind of, activist vibe, but definitely is willing to push back on the MAGA kind of extremes as well. So check out Ro Khanna. I mean, oh my God, how would a Buttigieg Khanna? That would definitely be a full nerd ticket. I think for a winning ticket, I'd probably go with Buttigieg Westmore. Maybe Buttigieg Whitmer. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Oh, or maybe Buttigieg AOC. Whoa. I don't know. Buttigieg AOC might activate the MAGA folks. They might go nuts. That might be too much for them. They'd feel like their whole world is collapsing or under threat. So at any rate, let me know in the comments who you like for 2028 and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks, nerds. Bye.